Arizona. I want to welcome you to another webinar presented by the Independent Carrier Safety Association. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce our newest partner who will be providing services to our members that he's going to talk about quite a bit, but also to give you an overview of what he sees going on in the larger trucking environment. Todd Amen is founder, president, and CEO of American Truck Business Services, or ATBS, with a lengthy background in trucking. He was co-president of Transwestern Express Limited, which was a family-owned truck line operating in the contiguous 48 states and Canada. In addition to his work with ATBS, Todd is a recognized leader in transportation and finance and is also on the board of directors of the Truckload Carriers Association. I have been in the industry a long time, and I can tell you that ATBS is one of the most respected organizations that services the trucking industry. So we're thrilled to be a new partner with ATBS and ATBS with us. We hope that our members will take advantage of the services that they will be offering to you. And with that, Todd, welcome to ICSA.
Karen, thank you so much. It's awesome to be here, actually in person. We talked about maybe doing this via video conference, but as it turns out, it was 11 degrees in Colorado where we're headquartered a couple of days ago. So I figured coming to Phoenix would be a lot nicer than doing it via video conference. And
there you go.
Yeah, we've known each other through the years, Karen, and I love to see what you guys are doing at the Safe Carriers headquarters here, because safe carriers make profitable carriers, right? And profitable carriers often can invest in safety. So between the two of us and our respective organizations, you know, our goal at the end of the day is to help drivers be safe and make more money. So really enjoy being here and look forward to sharing some information with your network of small carriers and talk about maybe what the next year or two holds for them. We all need some good news in this business. It's been tough for a while. So that's what we're going to spend a little time talking about today. I'll start for those of you that don't know who or what ATBS is. We're a 26-year-old company. We're based in Golden, Colorado. We have an office in Laramie, Wyoming as well. This is a picture of some of our people. We have about 130 employees. We work with about 20,000 contractors annually, and through our history, we've worked with over 150,000 independent contractors. And you can really think of us as accounting and tax people for contractors. A lot of people think of ATBS as the tax company that helps contractors file their taxes, but what we find the most fun and joy in is helping contractors be better and more profitable in their business. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go through this. It's interesting because as our world evolves and people do different things and they grow in their businesses, we realized quite a while ago that you can't just call a truck line or an independent contractor an owner operator just one thing. They are different things depending on how and what they do. And so we really segmented our client base, realizing that they need different things as they go through kind of their career journey. And so just because I'll talk about these a little bit as we go through the slides, I want to lay out kind of this career journey for everybody so we're thinking the same way. Pretty much every driver that comes into trucking starts on the left-hand side of this chart as a company driver, right? You go to driving school and then you typically get a job with a motor carrier that helps you get some real life experience. And a lot of people stay there and do very well, and that's how they spend their career. But there's oftentimes, ambition and opportunity, and a lot of drivers want to do better and make more money. And so they work their way higher up in their career path. And the next common step is what we call a pioneer, and that's a driver that will lease onto a motor carrier, typically, because that's the easiest way. They don't have tens of thousands of dollars to go out and buy their own truck and put a down payment down. So, they go through a facilitated program with a motor carrier and lease a truck and run for that motor carrier. As they grow in that and become more profitable and better, those drivers will oftentimes pay off that truck they lease from the motor carrier, or they'll go outside and find their own truck. But they like all the things that are provided under that motor carrier, the trailer, the insurance, the freight, all those kinds of things. So they stick with that motor carrier, and we call them hired guns. So the three on the left, the company driver, the pioneer, and the hired gun, all operate under a larger motor carrier authority. And then we have the next step in your journey. And, plenty of drivers take this. They become what we call a lone ranger. And that's a driver that goes out and gets their own authority, gets their own insurance. And, this is really where Independent Contractor Safety Association comes in, because maybe they're good at driving their truck, maybe they figured out their business, but they don't understand all that goes into operating their own individual or multi-truck safe operation. And then ultimately, if they are successful, they'll go out and buy more trucks and hire friends, relatives, and they become what we call a trailblazer. And, this is how the largest truck lines in America were born back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And there's still plenty today that go down this path. So we'll talk about each of those. And as I speak of ATBS and what we do, this is just a simple chart. As I said, we kind of realized we used to do kind of one size fits all, and we realized that different people need different things. And so those more sophisticated businesses that have been around quite a while that just need their books and taxes done, we offer our essential services where we just do bookkeeping and taxes. For that more newer contractor that needs to understand business better and understand their taxes, need to do a budget to figure out if we're going to make money. We do consulting and we provide benchmarking, a lot of those things. That's our professional service. And then ultimately we have what's called our enterprise service. And that's probably where a lot of the clients fall. They probably have a LLC set up, maybe an S corp, maybe they have multiple trucks running. We can do payroll, we can do corporate tax returns and all those kinds of things. So just the different levels of service that we provide for them. So most of what we're going to talk about today comes from our database. And I mentioned that we do business with over 20,000 independent contractors a year doing their business, books and taxes. The good news about that is because we take care of their books, we do them in the exact same way. So it doesn't matter what you're operating in, whether you're a gravel hauler, a port container hauler, an over the road, dry reefer, flatbed, specialized heavy haul, we do the books in the exact same way. And so it allows us to create a bunch of really good data that we call our benchmarking data. And so we're going to spend some time talking about that. We speak in the industry often with motor carriers, with our contractor clients, and also at associations and things like that about this data. So this year, because it's been a tough year, we went out and did some survey information with our drivers and our carriers, because we just wanted to understand what people are thinking. And so just to give you a little bit of demographics, this is a survey of our clients that we base the data on. And you can see on the left, I wouldn't call it an older population, right? The bell curve is between 40 and 60. But it's also really neat for me to see the younger, over 20% are 31 to 40, and even some in their, 20s. I think for a long time, we've thought of trucking and truck drivers as a dying breed. It's a tough job. It's a blue collar job. It's hard work. But as the industry evolves, as we've got more interesting safety, things on trucks, and, a lot of younger people are finding it more of an interesting job, and I don't have to shift an 18 gear transmission manually anymore. A lot of trucks are, automatic shifts. So we do see younger people coming in the business. If we look on the right, our population and independent contractors in general are more experienced, right? You can't just jump into being an owner operator and be successful at it. I guess unless it's 2021 and it's COVID, almost nobody could fail back then. But in the real world, in real economic times, you need to have some experience. And so it's a fairly experienced population. So we also ask our drivers, do you own your truck or lease it? Do you lease your motor carrier? You can see on the left, about 50% own their truck. So, or they have a loan outside. About 35 to 40% are under one of those carrier lease purchase programs. Most of our clients are single truck operators, meaning one truck, one driver. About 5% of our clients operate between 2 to 5 trucks. And, there's a handful that go up to 10 trucks. So I'm going to, spend just a few minutes talking about the big picture, what's going on in trucking. We're here at the end of December in 2024, and it's, no words to mince. It's been a brutal 3 years in trucking. We had a great run during the early years of COVID, and then things have just gotten really tough, and it's been the longest. And Karen said she's been in this business for 40 years. I've been around it for the same amount of time. And there's never been a more difficult time in trucking for a longer period. It's been tough. So, the things that we look at, there's so much information in the world today. We have, economic information on houses built and cars made and unemployment and interest rates. And, it's easy to get caught up in all that information. At the end of the day, what does that really mean in trucking? We found a few key benchmarks that really we just think predicts and shows where we're going. And so the spot market has gotten a lot of publicity in the last few years, and it's become a really key indicator, really because it's a real-time benchmark of what's going on in the world. So whether it's Truckstop or DAT, I like to watch truckstop.com simply because it comes out every Monday. You can get their market demand index, and I've watched it for 15 years, and so it gives me a good basis for what's happening. And without explaining a lot of what's on this slide, let's just consider the red line, the break even. When the market demand index is above the red line, that's good for truckers. It means that we have more freight than we have trucks, and rates are going to go up. And when we're below that red line, it's the opposite. And so you can see really since early 2022, we've been below that break even. We've bounced up to it a couple of times and we just can't get over it. Maybe one of the most important things that I like on this slide, again, because it's the spot market, it's what's happening today, is you look at that far right and you look at a net rate of $1.87. You can go back to pre-COVID times and see $1.54. And I know rates are terrible, right? They're at a point where we're not making money in our industry. But the good news is it's 30 cents above where it was pre-COVID, simply because we can't go below that. We're not making money at that number. In a lot of economic freight cycles on the down cycle, we'll go back to a number that's below where we went before things started going up. So keep that in mind, because we're going to look at a few different data points that kind of that 30 cents a mile sticks out in a lot of different ways. Another thing that I really like to watch is the Cass Freight Index, mostly because it's the opposite of what we just talked about. Spot freight gets posted every day and it's, real time freight getting moved. The Cass Freight Index is longer term contracted rates. And so this would be large motor carriers negotiating with shippers, and the Cass Payment Index, they pay freight bills for shippers and audit them. They do about $30 billion a year in freight payment. And so it's a really good index of that longer term contracted freight. You can see the Cass index, this is number of shipments, is down in 2024. The last really bad market we can look at is 2019. You can kind of ignore the 2020 because that was early COVID, that huge drop. So you can see we're below 2019, which was a really tough market from a freight perspective. Not terribly below, but that means that we don't have enough freight. And at the end of the day, we have too many trucks trying to haul that freight. If you look on the next slide, it's going to be the expenditures spent to move that. So this is going to show us something that I said a few slides ago. We've leveled off. We're about 30 cents a mile above. So the long-term contracted freight, the spot market are all showing about 30 cents a mile above. Again, I know that's not great news because our costs have gone up a lot in trucking, and we're going to talk about that. But what it shows is, yeah, rates have flattened out. We just can't go any lower, about 30 cents above. What we need is an increase in this, right? We've got to see it turn up. And I'll talk about that. Hopefully we're on the verge of that. So as we get to go out, ATBS has partnerships with a few hundred truck lines that have independent contractors that run for them. And we go out and talk about this data with those truck lines. And as we've done that, we get anecdotes from those carriers. And this is probably not new news to anybody. And it summarizes a lot of what I just said. Freight demand is down, loads are down, and we have too many trucks trying to haul those loads. But the good news is rates have really kind of leveled off. They're holding steady. We're in the trough. We've been in the trough. It feels like we've been in the bottom of the ditch for 3 years. We just have to get out of it. And probably the brightest news that I've heard is kind of that bottom one. When shippers start reaching out to motor carriers and saying, hey, we want to lock in some contracted rates and we'd like to do that for a longer period of time, they sense the market changing, right? So it's not a new bid package every 3 months because we know we can keep driving rates down. When they start saying we'd like to lock in at these rates for the next year or 3 years, it's because they know rates are going to go up. They just can't go anywhere else. So we're starting to hear and see some of that from carriers that are dealing with shippers, and that's good news. Thank God the election is behind us, because I think a lot of people just hunker down, not knowing what the future holds. If you went back 3 or 4 months, our industry, shippers, many people were just kind of in a, wait and see mode. We can now make decisions based on what we think is going to happen. And, we talk a lot about this with various people, and I'm just going to highlight a few things of what I think the change in administration in January is going to mean. Tariffs is a really big topic, and I'm no expert on tariffs. The one thing that I do know is that tariffs are going to increase demand in the short term and likely in the long term. And I'll just paint a really quick analogy for you. I live in Colorado, and in our election, we passed a 6.5% increase in ammunition and gun sales tax in Colorado. I'm a hunter, and so I was hunting right after this happened, and the buddies that I was hunting with said, "Hey, the cost of ammo and guns is going up, and so you better buy it because April 1st is when the new 6.5% tax goes in." So that's the same thing from tariffs, right? All of us that get things imported from other countries, shippers, everybody else, are likely expecting prices to go up next year relatively quickly after Trump gets in office. And so there's a lot of buying going on right now before the prices go up. That's going to increase demand for trucks, which is great. I think probably maybe even more importantly for all of us is oil. I think back to the days of Trump, whether you liked him or not. One of the earliest things he said was drill, baby, drill. He became famous for those words, right? And he's saying it again now. And at the end of the day, trucks move on oil and it costs money, right? So I just did a simple average of the 4 years that Trump was in office the last time, and the DOE national average was $2.80 per fuel. It bottomed out under $2 per gallon, which is hard to remember back to 2016. But fuel was cheap because we drilled, baby, drilled. And we became an exporter of oil, not an importer of oil. We became oil independent America. Under the last 4 years under President Biden, the average DOE national average price is $3.77. So that's a big deal, not because it just helps our trucks operate more cost efficiently because the price is lower, but that input cost goes into a lot of things in our country. So, that's going to help reduce inflation. Reduce regulation, that's another big topic, just like tariffs. But at the end of the day, regulation stymies business. It slows things down. We saw last time Trump reduced a lot of regulation and increased efficiency of business. Taxes are a big deal. I actually heard on the news this morning them talking about taxes. Trump passed a really huge tax cut back in the first 2 years of his administration. It was called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Most of those things were set to expire in 2025. They still are. And that would have a negative impact. And again, I'm not trying to be political. I'm just an economic guy that understands how things work. If you have lower taxes, that incentivizes corporations to do more. They reinvest that money into growth, into R&D and all those kinds of things. And so the likelihood of a lot of those tax cuts and Tax and Jobs Act things expiring next year is greatly reduced now. They'll probably be extended. And the last thing, much for the audience that we're talking to, the independent contractor model, business model, has been under attack really since the early days of the Obama administration. Democrats don't like independent contractors because they get a large amount of their funding from unions, and you can't unionize independent contractors. And so in a lot of ways, the previous administrations have tried to fight independent contractors. And in trucking, that model has been around for 100 years, right? As we said earlier, a lot of the largest truck runs in America were born out of an independent contractor, one guy with one truck that is now operating tens of thousands of trucks. It's the American dream, right? And so we saw 8 years of the Obama administration really attacking that model through a lot of different avenues. And then we saw Trump unwind that literally in the first 6 months of his administration. We reverted back under the Biden administration. And so likely, that attack is going to greatly subside when Trump gets back in office. So again, I'm not trying to be political other than to say that we saw 4 years under Trump, and it was really good for trucking, pretty much everything that happened. So we're expecting the same thing to happen when he gets back in office again in January. So we have heard from, all the industry experts and analysts that we have too much capacity in trucking. When you don't have enough freight and you have too many trucks, that's what makes for a down market. I love this slide. DAT started publishing this data a few years ago, and it talks about how many new motor carrier entrants are coming into the market. So you can see the green on the top, which is new drivers going out and getting their own authority. And we saw the huge spike during COVID, that big green bubble there. It was a great market, right? I could go get my own authority and I could literally make $100,000, $200,000 almost without trying. And so we've seen those new entrants bleed off over the last 3 years. The red on the far right we saw at the beginning of this year, actually kind of a spike back up where people were getting, I mean, it was almost neutral, right? So the market would say we need to bleed off more of these so that we can have balance between freight and drivers. And in a lot of ways, people are asking, why is this driver base more sustainable? Because in past down markets, you would see it disappear relatively quickly. And that's the people, it's you we're talking to today. You're the ones that have survived a really crappy 3 years. So you can answer it better than I can or anybody can. But what I know is you're vested in your business, right? You bought your trucks, you put big money down on sometimes expensive trucks during COVID, and you're not going to give up easily. In the past, we created too much capacity too easily. I guess I would say that by saying there were a lot of financial companies that would go out there and take advantage in a good market of people, and they would do very low money down, $1,000 down payment programs. And it was kind of an experiment for a lot of those new entrants. And as soon as things got tough, they just quit and left. I think the capacity we've created in the last 5 years is smarter, works harder. And so they're staying longer, right? They're in it for the long term. And, God bless you that are, because it hasn't been easy. I do know that. So we'll get into kind of the specific data that ATBS has on independent contractors and talk about it right now. And I guess just to kind of, set the understanding, we have done this for over 20 years. And so the data's, we purify it, I guess is the easiest way to say it. We take out the really highs and the really lows so that we have a good average in the middle. We also weight it based on what happens in the market. So it's definitely slanted towards the dry van business because that's the bulk of the market. We have reefer data in here and we have flatbed. We also have specialized and tank. So as we talk through it, we'll start off, at the beginning, where does the revenue stand? And if you look at miles, it's kind of strange, but it also makes sense. People are working harder because they have to. They're not making as much money. And in truck driving, the only way when the market's bad for me to do better is I got to work harder. So I'm running more miles. In the last year over year, drivers are running an average of 93,000 miles. It's up about 7%. And I will kind of talk about that more in a bigger picture and go to this slide, which is a 20-year history of miles. It's kind of crazy. If you go halfway back through Karen and mine's career, back to the early 2000s, the average owner operator ran 139,000 miles. And there was nothing called ICSA because we had 3 logbooks. We shut the door, we put the pedal to the metal, and that's how we made money, right? We just ran our butts off. And over the years, we've had things like e-logs come in, we've had government regulation, and also we've had a better economic environment. And so it's crazy today that the average owner operator is running, 93,000 miles versus 139,000 miles. That's a good thing because it was unsafe and it was unhealthy, the miles that drivers used to run. You can see the far right of this during COVID. And for me, it's counterintuitive because when you see that big drop, drivers are running 108,000 miles pre-COVID on average. If you actually did the logs, a driver can pretty easily really run 130,000 miles if things are perfectly lined up, right? I got drop-in hooks and everything's just right. My truck doesn't break down. But when you throw in the inefficiencies of trucking, 108,000 miles average per driver is probably a reasonable average. You see a big drop in 2021 and 2022. That's because drivers' net incomes, literally doubled. And when that happens, drivers work less. I would rather be home on weekends. I'd rather take shorter length of hauls. I'd rather have a better quality of life. I'd rather do some fishing. And so drivers drove less when they made more money. Then things got tough, right? In early 2022, it took about a year before drivers really felt that pain, but they've started working harder. So one thing that's interesting about this, and I talk about it with a lot of people, I think our industry doesn't have analysis to really understand when drivers run more miles, it's like adding more capacity back into the system, right? So we don't have to go buy a bunch of trucks and hire a bunch of drivers to have too many trucks. When you have either 300,000 independent contractors or 3 million Class 8 trucks, when you throw the company drivers in there, all working harder, it's like pouring more capacity back into the business. And that's one of the reasons that this has been a prolonged downturn, is because the people that are in it are working harder to make the same amount of money that they used to make. One thing that scares me a little bit is we're not back to where we were pre-COVID levels, right? And so drivers still can run. If they bottomed out at 85,000 miles, they're now running 93,000 miles, but they used to run 108,000 miles. We're only halfway back. And so we can keep running more miles if rates don't pick up, which is just going to prolong the slowness of this business. If we look at rate per mile, it's down last year. 8% to $1.89. It's a terrible rate. We can't make money at
Nobody can make
$1.89.
money on that.
No, it's tough. One of the biggest reasons that rates were down in the last year, though, is because fuel came down. So that's a good reason, right? The fuel surcharge comes down because my fuel costs came down. So if we look at rate per mile, this is going to go back to the first few slides that I showed you. This is ATBS's, kind of exclusive data for just owner operators. We look at a net rate without fuel. We see our drivers at about $1.45 per mile. If you go to the left, you can see pre-COVID at $1.15. So there's that 30 cents a mile. One more time, a different data point. We've leveled off 30 cents a mile above where we used to be because our costs are up. This slide, I'll say just a few things. As I defined owner operators, we're in a market over the last couple of years where many owner operators went back to fleets because the spot market was terrible and they couldn't make money, right? And those fleets had longer term contracted rates that were a bit higher. So the red line on this slide shows the break even of where do I go from being signed on to the motor carrier, as opposed to going out and being a lone ranger and doing my own thing. We think, that's about 50 cents a mile or around $50,000. So for me to go do my own thing, get my own authority, manage my own safety, get my own trailer, book my own loads, have my own auto liability insurance, costs about 50 cents a mile. So if the market's paying me less than a 50 cent per mile differential, then I'm better off with a fleet. If it's paying me more than that, then I'm better off under my own authority. You can see for the last 3 years, we've been below that break even, right? We've been between 15 to 20 cents a mile. I'm 15 to 50 cents a mile below that break even. And so that's why you saw a lot of those people with their own trucks wanting to go back to motor carriers at a time when the motor carrier didn't need them because there's not enough freight. So, it's a catch-22 a lot of times. You can see COVID, when we spiked above that 50 cent break even, we saw a huge migration of those drivers with their own trucks out to get their own authority. We're nearing a time where we're going to be back at this break even. And I'm not saying that everybody that is operating their own authority, because everybody we're talking to on this call likely is doing this, right? So I'm not saying it's a loser situation. I'm just saying the average driver that is not, managing their business real well and running pure spot market without their own contracted freight is having a hard time making money right now. This just shows the differential in a rate. If I'm running the spot market in the dry van business, I'm going to get about a $2.09 per mile. If I'm running for a fleet, on average, I'm going to get $1.77. So that's the difference, about 30 cents, not the 50 cents that it takes to make money. So this goes back to a bit of our survey and a little bit of expectations. When do we think things are going to change? And you can see that predominantly most people are saying the first half of next year into the second half is when we feel like the market's going to get better. You can see on the far right what they think is going to happen to rates. They think they're going to stay relatively flat. We don't like to hear that. We need rates to go up, right? And so many people this was pre-election, we did this survey. A lot of people were hoping that rates were going to go up 1 to 3%. I honestly believe, just, gut instinct tells me that we're going to see rates go up 3 to 8% when we start hitting bid season next year, because you have large fleets that are reporting losing money, operating break even. It doesn't happen unless it's a really, really terrible market. And so we're going to see a lot of fleets just say no when shippers send out bid packages. They're going to say, we're already seeing it. We have to increase our rates. So if we look at total revenue, miles times revenue per mile gets us gross revenue. It's not down a ton, right? Because we're running more miles at a lower rate. We're doing about $175,000 per year. I know the folks at ICSA will make this PowerPoint available to you. So I failed to mention the bottom right breaks out those segments that we talked about. The independent is those drivers with their own authority doing things on their own. The dry reefer and flatbed segments are operating in those segments of the industry. So you can see based on what you're doing, you can kind of benchmark yourself against those numbers. So we'll switch over to the cost side of the business. And, it's kind of funny because when I go back to the COVID days, the mindset was 180 degrees from what it was today, right? I don't really care about costs. I don't care what my fuel economy is because the market's paying me so much. I'm going to drive as fast as the law allows me to get to the next load to make more money, and I'm going to take time off. We do a 180 on that when things are tough. I have to manage costs because every dollar I save goes to the bottom line, and I have to work harder, right? And so the cost side became really important about 2.5 years ago. So let's talk about costs. At ATBS, we think of things two different ways. I don't want to get into a bunch of crazy accounting jargon for you, but for owner operators, it's really important that you understand your business to the depth that you know what your fixed costs are and your variable costs are, because I have to understand my break even in difficult times, because I make a lot more money once I've covered my break even. Again, I'm not going to give you an accounting lesson today, but let's talk about some of those costs. Our fixed costs are relatively flat. They're up a bit. We'll talk about components of those and why that is. It's mostly due to truck payments. So our average fixed costs are up 3.2%. If we look at our variable costs are down about 6.3%. Most of that is due to fuel. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. So overall, despite the tremendous inflation we've had over the last year, our costs are actually down a bit. Again, that's purely related to fuel. So if we look at fuel's down 9 cents a mile. The average driver is spending 57 cents a mile on fuel right now. If we look at the long term of fuel, it's interesting because when things are tough, drivers pay attention to cost. So we can see in the far right of this slide that fuel economy has gone up in the last 18 months. It has to. We have to pay attention to our miles per gallon. At the same time, we're also getting trucks into our business. Owner operators typically operate with used trucks, 500,000 miles on them. And so we're getting some of those newer trucks that have the technology to get better fuel economy. One thing that's super interesting to me on this slide is just look at 2022 and that bubble where we got great fuel economy. And we go back and think about that time, and it's when all the rest of us went home and we were locked in our houses. There was zero congestion on the road, which I know drivers that drove during that time, and it was like the greatest time of their life. I could just get in and drive, and I don't get stopped driving through Phoenix and LA and Denver and Atlanta, right? There was no traffic. Don't all truck drivers wish we could go back to that time? We don't need COVID all over again, but you can also see that efficiency helped fuel economy so much. It was amazing. So if we break it down by segment, we see for the first time drivers getting over 7 miles per gallon in the last 12 months because they have to save money on fuel. This is just a slide that kind of compares when fuel's going up and down. It's really important to understand the fuel surcharge component of our revenue. Is it offsetting what our costs have done? Usually it's about even in a rising and falling market. So you can see on the far right, our revenue went down $3,600 because our fuel surcharge went down, but our fuel costs went down $4,300. That tells us that drivers are doing a better job managing their fuel. Even though fuel costs are coming down, they're doing even better than that. So this is one of the components of our fixed costs. Truck payments have gone up, ridiculously, right? The new EPA requirements and just a lot of those things have really inflated the cost of trucks. So if I go back to pre-COVID, the average driver was paying about $2,300 a month for a truck. Today, they're around $2,900. That's big inflation, right? That's why that 30 cents a mile is staying. We can't go below that. Our truck payments cost us more. That's not going to go away, right? If we look at maintenance, it's seemingly good news because it's flat. The average driver is spending, $11,800 a year on maintenance. But we know we're driving more miles. And so actually maintenance costs should be up a bit. I'll talk about that a little more on this slide. What we see typically in difficult times is drivers defer maintenance. And so we can kind of see that dip in maintenance costs on the right-hand side. And that's not a good thing because when I'm not making enough money, I extend my oil change. I put off the things that aren't going to put me out of service if I get, taken through a port. The trouble is that's going to catch up with me, right? At some point, I'm going to have to fix those things that are broken, and I'm probably going to wear my truck out quicker if I'm not doing preventive maintenance on time. So I really think if you look during the Great Recession, you see a huge dip and then you see a huge long spike afterwards. This was a really quick dip and a spike afterwards. I think one of the reasons is these more complicated, sophisticated trucks that we operate today, I really can't defer maintenance because it'll shut me down for weeks at a time. And so people maybe tried to do some of that, but they realized I can't do that because then I can't run. So we do see maintenance costs. Today, used to be I could run a truck under 500,000 miles for 5-6 cents a mile. Today, we tell our average driver to put 11 to 12 cents a mile aside for maintenance. Just the cost of, higher labor costs, higher parts costs. Trucks are more expensive to maintain today. So let's get to what really matters, how much money are drivers making? And this is a hard slide for me to talk about because we saw drivers during COVID on average max out at an average of $73,000. It was a good income for the average owner operator. We'll talk about, higher, better drivers and what they make in a couple of slides, but we're down from $73,000 to $63,000. It's a really big drop in net income. And I can tell you, drivers are no different than the rest of us. The cost of eggs, the cost of milk, car payments, home payments, all that. We've had tremendous inflation. And so if we're trying to live on the same amount of money that we made 5 years ago as an owner operator, it doesn't work, right? The net income has to go up. If we look at this slide, really, all I want to say about it is if we look at the far left during a really good economic time, different things in the industry paid me differently, right? As an independent driver, I made significantly more money. As a flatbed driver, I might have made significantly more money. Reefer drivers were making less. What happens as we move to the right in more difficult times is we kind of revert to the mean, right? So I guess one message I'd leave you is it's not going to pay you to go do something different today. If you're struggling in your flatbed business, it's not going to help to go to the reefer or the dry van business and vice versa, right? Stick with what you're doing until things get better. And then sometimes there are anomalies like construction picks up and, housing starts get good and the flatbed business gets really good. So a bad economy is not a time to make a change, even though you might say things are terrible in what I'm doing. I need to do something differently. So the long-term view of net income on this slide, I talked about a little bit, the gross dollars on the top, right? We're right back to where we were pre-COVID, and that doesn't work. Just like the truck lines that are down 70% of their earnings, they're barely breaking even. Some are even losing money. We're in an industry where that just can't continue. So I do expect rates are going to go up and things are going to get better as we head into 2025. So this is a good snapshot for those of you on this call, because my guess is if you're working with ICSA, if you care about your business, you're more conscientious than a lot of drivers that are just out there kind of winging it, right? And so maybe you're in the middle of the top third rather than the bottom third. We find our bottom third clients, I mean, you can look through the good times and the bad times. They make 56 grand a year. Maybe they're part-time drivers, maybe they're semi-retired, maybe they should be company drivers because they can't take the risk, right? I can make a lot more than 56 grand as a company driver. But if you're in the middle third or the top third, we've turned the corner. Those drivers are the ones getting better fuel economy. They're the ones running more miles. They're the ones that are taking the loads at night north of I-40 in the winter because, they're not afraid to go up and put chains on. They have to in a market like this, right? And so you can see them making $86,000 a year, the middle third. But the top third you can see is making $150,000 a year. And our top 10% are making over 200,000. Those are niche businesses, but it's to say that trucking, I can make a good living if I do the right things, even in a really difficult market. So this is my last slide, and I like to talk about it really it's the economic equation for anybody that works. How hard do I have to work, and how much am I going to get paid for doing that work, right? And if I have to work harder to make less money, I'm going to probably look for something else to do because that's not a good thing. So we can go back through the 20-year history of the time we've had data. And I already talked about 20 years ago, the average driver was running 139,000 miles. Today, they're running 91,000 miles. That's a literal reduction of 35% in work, right? Because miles are work for the average owner operator. And I'm not here to say it's your job, your life has gotten easy because you're working a lot less, right? But it's gotten much better. I don't have to, shut the door and live in my truck for 5 weeks at a time, which is what had to happen 20 years ago. I can choose regional runs. In some cases, I can be home on weekends in trucking today. So the work environment's certainly gotten better. At the same time, if we look at the bottom, we've gone from making $47,000 to $63,000. So my work's reduced by 35%. My net income's gone up by 35%. Overall, that's a good economic paradigm. I'll often use this slide when we're talking to people and we share our data with regulators. We've shared it with California when we were fighting the AB5 battle. We share it with many people in Washington. When they talk about these poor imprisoned drivers that we force into these terrible owner-operator programs, it's a bunch of lies and garbage. And this economic data proves that, right? This is a good picture. Anybody who works less and makes more money over a long period of time will stick with what they're doing. And it's not to say it's not super challenging right now, right? We made $73,000 just a couple of years ago, and today we're making $63,000. But there's a lot of jobs in America that's happening with right now. We're just in a tough time. I'm optimistic that things are going to get better. We've been through 3 really tough years, and I really do believe, we're on the way to a recovery and things are going to get better for trucking. So that's the last of my slides. I'll stop there, and I know maybe we've got some questions.
Well, I would like to ask one. Looking at the fact that during COVID, at least the first year, inventories were depleted there was a lot more freight to be hauled because nobody had enough inventory. Through 2022, it appears that a lot of retailers and even wholesalers built up their inventories. So they haven't depleted them as fast as maybe they normally would have. Do you see that as one of the factors in why freight rates are, well, why freight is depressed and why freight rates are depressed?
I think for sure, Karen. And the crazy thing about COVID is it just turned everything upside down from what we expected, right? And when we all got locked in our houses, we all decided we want to go buy a bunch of stuff because we're in our houses and stuff moves on trucks. And so I think all of us that were in trucking in early COVID were expecting the Great Depression, like everybody's gone away. Nobody's going to buy stuff and it's going to be terrible. And the exact reverse of that happened. And all the manufacturers and the sellers of goods couldn't keep up with that. We all decided to buy stuff, right? And so the whole supply chain, one good thing that came out is nobody in the world knew what logistics and supply chain was before COVID. And all of a sudden, when I couldn't buy toilet paper and paper towels and a big screen TV and lumber to build onto my deck, people realized that the supply chain is truck drivers. And we couldn't get enough fast enough to buy all that stuff. And so, right, we didn't have the inventory and we overbuilt that inventory because once we got out of our houses, we didn't go out to eat, we didn't go on cruises, we didn't make trips. So we all shifted our spending from all the stuff to the experiences, right? And so then all the moving of things went away because we stopped buying things. And so the inventory got rebuilt during that period of time. So I don't know, I'm not a great economist on stuff like that, but my sense is that inventory is relatively level right now, right? No store wants to have excess stuff. It costs them money. Right. So they're fairly lean probably in their inventories. Yeah, we've got to have buying pick up. People got to start buying more stuff to move on trucks.
Exactly. Do we have any other questions?
Yes. We've got some with the new administration. Will it help the recovery happen sooner?
I do believe it will. And so part of it is a big question. Is it just a pull forward where we're going to do things faster and then we're going to pay for that down the road? Or is it sustainable? And a lot of that goes to tariffs, taxes, incentives, all those kinds of things. So I do believe we're going to recover quicker than we would have. I think most people would have expected a recovery maybe the back half of next year. I think we might experience it in the second quarter because of the tariffs, because things are going to be pulled forward, because now we can plan that we're not going to have a big tax increase when things expire next year. So I do think it's going to get better quicker. My gut would tell me that's going to be second quarter of next year, start getting good. The real question is how sustainable is it, right? We can juice an economy, right? We can lower interest rates, we can, print money and all those kinds of things, but we pay for that later. So that remains to be seen. I think things will be good for a few years, but we'll see.
I hearken back to when President Trump was in his first term. We were involved in the company that I was running at the time on at least 2 occasions where he wanted to have trucks as his background for press conferences and rallies and so on. I can remember our trucks parked in front of the White House, and he got in the truck and you did the Jake break and all of that. And we expect from a political perspective that some of these regulatory pressures on our members will ease up. Now, there's a backlog of things that are sitting there that, hopefully will go by the wayside.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest ones is the new zero vehicle emissions proposals of US EPA. And this is not California, this is EPA. To see, how will those roll out, or will they roll out? Because that's a huge operating issue for every trucker, whether they're, a single truck operator or 10,000 truck operator. When you have to meet certain requirements that right now the technology cannot meet, what do?
Yeah, your costs go up, right? A lot.
Exactly.
Trucks get way more expensive. It creates a potentially huge pre-buy of trucks. And Yeah, it's, you know, stimulus or things that impact an economy that are outside of the norm, and that causes issues. So yeah, again, I don't want to be political, but we know, like you said, Trump had trucks on the White House lawn.
Mhm.
That's a good thing for trucking
Mhm.
and all the things that go along with that. I don't think he's changed his position on liking trucks.
Well, hopefully not.
You never know for sure.
As a current ICSA member, how do I sign up for ATBS?
That's a good question. We have a discount for ICSA members, and the easiest way to do it is you can call our phone number, which is on the screen, 888-640-4829 or for tax. Tell them you're an ICSA member and it will get you a great discount on the service. That'd be the easiest way to do it.
And then we will have a link on our website and a landing page before too long, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Any other questions? Okay. Well, we're at the end of our time. Todd, we want to thank you again for making the trip here. I recognize that 70 degrees is much more palatable than 11 degrees, but still, it's good to have you with us. Good to have this information. And as Todd mentioned a while ago, we will have these slides put in a PDF that you'll be able to download. And as most of you know, some of you are listening to this after you got off the road. So the recording obviously is going to be up there for quite a while. Again, thank you, Todd. We're looking forward to working with you.
Karen, it's really awesome to be partners. I love what you guys do. Safe drivers are profitable drivers, and vice versa. Profitable drivers can invest in safety. So it makes complete sense what we do together. At the end of the day, I know you, like me, have a heart for truck drivers, right? We just want them to succeed, support their families, move our economy forward, drive safe.
And thank you, everyone on the call.